The sweater was gray, not the fashionable charcoal gray that designers put on runways, but the tired, faded gray of something that had been washed too many times and worn too hard. The left elbow had a hole the size of a quarter. The cuffs were frayed. The neckline stretched out from years of being pulled over someone's head in a hurry. If you looked closely at the hem, you could see where someone had attempted to repair a tear with mismatched thread, the stitches uneven and amateurish. It was, by any objective measure, garbage, but to Michael Bublé it was everything. The sweater sat in the back of his closet in his Lowe's Angels home, hidden behind designer suits and tailored shirts that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His assistant, Rebecca Chen, had been working for Michael for 3 years, and she'd seen the sweater dozens of times. While organizing his wardrobe, every time she suggested donating it, Michael would shake his head. "Not that one," he'd say quietly. "Keep that one." Rebecca never pushed. She'd learned early in her employment that Michael, despite his easy charm and public warmth, had certain boundaries. The sweater was clearly one of them. But on a Tuesday morning in October 2019, Rebecca made a mistake that would change 3 lives in ways none of them could have predicted. She'd been sorting through Michael's closet, preparing for the seasonal clothing swap that happened twice a year. Summer clothes went into storage. Fall and winter items came out. It was routine work, mindless and methodical. She'd done it 100 times. The gray sweater was wedged between 2 coats Michael never wore. Rebecca pulled it out, examined the holes and frayed edges, and made a decision. Michael was traveling. He wouldn't notice, and honestly, keeping this ratty sweater when he had a closet full of beautiful clothes seemed pointless. It was taking up space that could be used for something better. She put it in the donation bag. 4 boxes of clothing went to Goodwill that afternoon. Rebecca felt virtuous, efficient. She'd cleared out the clutter, made room, done her job. Michael returned from his trip 2 days later. Rebecca picked him up from the airport, chatted about his schedule for the upcoming week, mentioned she'd organized his closet while he was gone. "Great," Michael said absently, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Thanks, Rebecca." Everything seemed fine, until 11 p.m. that night when Rebecca's phone rang. "Where is it?" Michael's voice was tight, controlled in the way people sound when they're trying very hard not to yell. "Where's what?" Rebecca asked, confused. She'd been asleep. "The gray sweater, the one with the hole in the elbow. Where is it?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Michael, I donated it. It was falling apart. I thought." "You thought what?" Now his voice rose. "Did I tell you to donate it?" "No, but did I say you could touch that sweater?" "Michael, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." "Which Goodwill?" He interrupted. "Where did you take it?" "The one on Sunset Boulevard." "But Michael, that was 2 days ago. They probably already." He hung up. Rebecca sat in her bed, phone still pressed to her ear, feeling sick. In 3 years of working for Michael, she'd never heard him sound like that. Angry, yes. Frustrated occasionally, but this was different. This was panic. The next morning, Michael was at the Goodwill on Sunset before it opened. He stood outside the locked doors, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to look inconspicuous. When the manager, a woman named Diane Foster, unlocked the entrance at 9 a.m., Michael was the first person through. "I'm looking for a gray sweater," he said quickly. "It was donated 2 days ago. Gray, worn out, hole in the left elbow." "Please tell me you still have it." Diane looked at him closely. Recognition flickered across her face. "You're Michael Bublé?" "Yes, the sweater. Do you have it?" "Sir, we get hundreds of donations a week. Things get processed, sorted, priced, and put on the floor very quickly. If it came in 2 days ago, it's probably already been sold or—" "Can you check?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Please." Diane saw something in his face that made her nod. "Let me look in the back." 15 minutes later, she returned, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. If it came in, it's already on the floor or it's been purchased. You're welcome to look through the men's section." Michael spent 2 hours searching every rack. Gray sweaters, yes, but not his sweater, not the one. He left the store feeling hollowed out. Rebecca had texted him 4 times, apologizing. He hadn't responded. He couldn't explain to her what she'd given away because he didn't fully understand it himself. The sweater was from 1997. Michael had been 22 years old, living in Vancouver, playing small gigs for barely enough money to cover rent. He'd bought the sweater at a thrift store for $4. Because winter was coming and he didn't have a proper coat. It was too big on him then, hanging loose over his thin frame, but it was warm. He'd worn it to his first real recording session, worn it to the meeting where he'd signed his first management contract. worn it the night he'd called his grandfather to tell him the contract was real, that this might actually happen. The sweater had been there for every significant moment when Michael Bublé, the struggling singer, was becoming Michael Bublé, the artist. It represented the version of himself who'd had nothing but hope and hunger, the version who'd sung in empty clubs and wondered if anyone would ever care. And now it was gone. Over the next week, Michael became obsessed. He visited every Goodwill in Los Angeles. He called donation centers. He had Rebecca, who was devastated and apologetic. Contact resale shops, nothing. Michael, his wife Luisana, said gently one evening, "It's just a sweater." "I know," he said, but it wasn't. It was proof that he'd been real once, that the person he'd been before fame had existed. That success hadn't erased him completely. 3 weeks after the sweater disappeared, Michael was at a small charity event in Pasadena. He was there to perform, to smile, to be Michael Bublé, the celebrity. During a break, he stepped outside for air. That's when he saw it. A young man was sitting on the steps of the venue, hunched over, wearing a gray sweater. A gray sweater with a hole in the left elbow. Michael's breath caught. He walked closer. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "That sweater, where did you get it?" The young man looked up. He was maybe 19, heavy-set, with tired eyes, and the kind of defeated posture Michael recognized from his own difficult years. The kid's name tag read Tyler Morrison, catering staff. "Goodwill," Tyler said quietly. "Like 3 weeks ago." "Why?" Michael sat down on the steps beside him, not caring that his expensive suit would get dirty. "That sweater used to be mine." Tyler's eyes widened. "Wait, you're Michael Bublé." "I am." "And that sweater, I've been looking for it since my assistant accidentally donated it." Tyler looked down at the sweater, then back at Michael. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. Do you want it back?" Michael opened his mouth to say yes, of course yes, that's why he'd been searching. But then he really looked at Tyler, at the way the kid was sitting, at the exhaustion in his face, at the way his hands were gripping the sweater's cuffs like they were the only solid things in his world. "Why did you buy it?" Michael asked instead. Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, it was cheap, and it looked comfortable, like someone had worn it a lot, like it had been loved, you know." He paused. "I've been wearing it every day since I got it. It sounds stupid, but when I put it on, I feel like maybe things aren't completely hopeless." Michael felt something shift in his chest. "What's going on, Tyler?" And Tyler, for reasons he couldn't explain, told this famous stranger the truth. He was 19. He dropped out of college after his mother died from cancer 6 months ago. He was living in his car, working 3 part-time jobs to avoid homelessness. He had no friends, no family, no plan, just survival day after day. "The sweater helps," Tyler said quietly. "I know that's weird, but when I wear it, I imagine the person who owned it before had their life together, that they were confident and successful, and maybe if I wear it enough, some of that will rub off on me." Michael's throat tightened. Tyler, the person who owned that sweater, was broke and terrified. "I wore that sweater because I couldn't afford anything better. I wore it while playing gigs where no one listened, while wondering if I was wasting my life chasing something impossible." Tyler looked at him, confused. "But I kept wearing it," Michael continued, "because it reminded me that I was trying, that even if I failed, at least I was showing up. That sweater witnessed every moment when I was nobody, hoping to become somebody. And it worked," Tyler said softly. "You made it. Eventually, but not because of the sweater, because I didn't give up." Michael paused. "What do you want to do, Tyler? If money and fear weren't issues, what would you do?" Tyler hesitated. "Music. I used to write songs, piano stuff, but that's not realistic. I need to focus on getting stable first." "Stable is important," Michael agreed, "but so is not giving up on the things that make you feel alive." He pulled out his phone. "What's your number?" Tyler gave it to him, bewildered. Michael stood up, brushing off his pants. "Keep the sweater, Tyler. It looks better on you anyway, but I'm going to call you tomorrow, and we're going to talk about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know people in music. I know studios. I know teachers who could help you develop your skills. I can't promise you'll become a star, but I can promise you won't have to live in your car while figuring it out." Tyler stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Michael looked at the sweater one last time. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and because that sweater deserves to witness another person's journey from nowhere to somewhere. It served me well. Now it's your turn." True to his word, Michael called Tyler the next day. Then he made other calls. To a friend who owned a recording studio and needed an assistant. To a landlord who had a small apartment available. To a music teacher who agreed to take Tyler on as a student at a reduced rate. Michael didn't pay for everything. He didn't want to. Tyler needed to work for it, to earn it, to feel like he was building something rather than receiving charity. But Michael removed the most impossible barriers, the ones that made getting started feel insurmountable. 6 months later, Tyler had moved into the apartment. He was working at the studio, learning the technical side of music production while writing songs on the side. He gained weight in a healthy way. The exhaustion had left his eyes, replaced by something that looked like hope. He still wore the gray sweater, not every day now, but often enough that it remained part of his routine. A reminder of where he'd come from, of the famous stranger who'd sat beside him on steps and seen him as a person rather than a catering worker. Michael and Tyler met for coffee every few months. They talked about music, about life, about the strange paths that led people to where they needed to be. Michael never asked for the sweater back. It had found its purpose. A year. After that night on the steps, Tyler finished his first original composition. It was a piano piece, melancholic and hopeful at the same time. He sent a recording to Michael with a simple message: "Thank you for seeing me." Michael listened to it alone in his home studio. The music was raw but genuine, full of the kind of emotion that can't be taught. When it ended, he sat in silence for several minutes. Then he called Tyler. "That piece you sent me, it's beautiful, really." Tyler's voice was uncertain. "I wasn't sure if it was any good." "It's honest," Michael said, "and honest is better than perfect." 2 years after finding the sweater, Tyler was offered a position as a full-time sound engineer at a major studio. The job came with benefits, stability, a salary that meant he'd never have to sleep in his car again. He accepted immediately, but he also kept writing music, not for fame or success, but because it was the thing that made him feel alive, the thing that made sense when nothing else did. 3 years after the sweater, Tyler released an independent album. It didn't chart, it didn't make him famous, but it existed, it was real, and that was enough. Michael attended the small album release party Tyler threw at a local venue. Afterward, Tyler approached him holding a box. "I wanted to give you this," Tyler said. Michael opened it. Inside was the gray sweater, carefully folded with a note on top. The note read, "This sweater witnessed your journey from nobody to somebody. Then it witnessed mine from hopeless to hopeful. I think it's time it came home. Thank you for letting me borrow it. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for teaching me that success isn't about fame, it's about not giving up on yourself." Michael held the sweater, feeling the familiar worn fabric, the hole in the elbow, the frayed cuffs. It looked even more worn than before, if that was possible. But it also looked loved, well used, like it had served its purpose. He looked up at Tyler, who was watching him nervously. "Tyler," Michael said quietly, "this sweater has traveled through 2 complete journeys now, mine and yours. I think that's a pretty good legacy for $4 worth of gray cotton. So you'll take it back?" Michael smiled. "No, I want you to keep it, but not for yourself." Tyler looked confused. "Keep it until you meet someone who needs it," Michael explained. "Someone who's where you were 3 years ago, someone who needs to borrow some hope. And then pass it on." Understanding dawned on Tyler's face. "You mean like a tradition," Michael finished. "The sweater finds people who need it, stays with them until they're steady, then moves on to the next person." Tyler smiled slowly. "That's a good idea. I think so too." That night, Michael went home and told Luisana the whole story, about the sweater, about Rebecca's mistake, about the panic he'd felt when it was gone, about finding Tyler, about what the sweater had become. "So you're really not taking it back?" Luisana asked. "No," Michael said, "because I learned something important. That sweater was never about the fabric or the memories. It was about what it represented, the struggle and the hope and the refusal to give up. And that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to anyone who needs it." Rebecca, who'd felt terrible for months about the donation, cried when Michael finally explained the whole story to her. "I'm so sorry I gave it away," she said. "Don't be," Michael told her. "If you hadn't, Tyler would still be living in his car. Some mistakes turn into miracles. You just have to pay attention to where they led." 5 years after the sweater left Michael's closet, Tyler was working as a successful sound engineer and composer. He'd found stability, purpose, a life that felt meaningful, and true to his promise, he'd kept the sweater. One afternoon, he met a young woman named Sophia at a coffee shop. She was a musician, struggling, working 3 jobs, sleeping on friends' couches, wondering if she should give up and do something practical. Tyler recognized the exhaustion in her eyes, the defeated posture. Quiet desperation. He thought about a sweater, about a famous singer sitting on steps beside a catering worker, about being seen when you feel invisible. The next day, Tyler brought the gray sweater to the coffee shop and gave it to Sophia with a simple note: borrow this until you don't need it anymore, then pass it on to someone who does. From Michael Bublé via Tyler Morrison. Sophia stared at the worn sweater, at the hole in the elbow, at the note. She didn't understand yet. But she would. The sweater continued its journey, and somewhere in Lowe's Angels, Michael Bublé smiled, knowing that the thing he'd been most afraid to lose had become something better than he'd ever imagined. Not a relic of his past, but a living tradition of hope being passed from one struggling artist to another. The sweater was still gray, still worn, still had that hole in the left elbow, but it wasn't garbage. It was a promise that survival is possible, that someone sees you, that your struggle matters. And sometimes the things we're most afraid to lose are the things that change the most lives when we finally let them go.